Great. Thank you so much to all of you that are already here. We're so grateful that people keep showing up for Trauma Training Tuesday. It warms my heart in all sincerity that people, with everything everyone has going on, that people still care enough to want to learn more and understand more. It's absolutely touching and speaks so well to our community. Today's session is on early childhood. I think many of us here are early childhood providers or our parents, and we know that trauma impacts the youngest of us in pretty significant ways. And we really don't know how being young in a pandemic is going to impact their development. But luckily, we have Massachusetts expertise. We have the UMass Trauma Training Center, right kind of on the top of the hill in Worcester. And they have been our Worcester Addresses Childhood Traumas partners since we even thought about intervening and how to intervene. So their expertise has underpinned everything we do. But I am thrilled that today we have Zlatina Kostova.
Perfect. Kostova, but it's still great.
She's been very kind to me with, my pronunciations. It's a little...
As you will be kind to me with my pronunciation, so...
Yes, absolutely. You can see the absolutely lovely Zlatina Kostova is here. She's a clinical psychologist by training. She did her post-doctoral. She's originally from Bulgaria. She's studied in Switzerland and US and France, right? Italy,
yeah.
Very global, which is so cool. And she did her postdoc at UMass Trauma Training Center. And because of the pandemic, one of the good things of the pandemic, here she is still in Worcester. And so she could tell you a little bit more about that and about herself. But we're just so grateful for you that you're here today and that you're going to really help us as much as you can understand and cope with what's happening for the youngest in our community. So I'll turn it over to you, and I'll just remind everybody, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat. If a question or a comment comes up, you could jump right in if you'd like. Or if you feel better about that, you could just put that in the chat and we'll wait for a break. But it does seem like a pretty manageable amount of people. So if somebody really wants to jump in, I think that will be fine. We really want this to be useful and helpful for everyone. So the more we hear from you, the better a job we can do of making sure the content is what you need. So I'm going to mute myself and turn it on over to you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Welcome, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here, and I can already feel the warmth and the affection of this amazing community. And I wish I was part already earlier of this, but I think from now on, I will definitely attend to your trainings because it sounds like an amazing community. So thank you, everyone, for being here, for wanting to learn together, because I see this training as an exchanging experience, and I would love also to hear from you. I would like to thank Amy because we are having an amazing collaboration, and she's been so thoughtful for inviting us and consulting with us. She gave me a whole training about what Worcester Act is doing, and I am really impressed by her willingness and passion about these things. So it's really an honor to be here together and be accompanied by Amy and having all of you here. So I'll just say a couple of things about myself because you can already hear my kind of weird accent probably. And Amy already mentioned that I am Bulgarian. I was born in Bulgaria, and then I did my undergrad studies in Italy. So I spent half of my life in Italy where I lived there, and it is just a beautiful, beautiful country, and part of my identity and heart will be always there. And then I did my PhD in Switzerland. And the last year of my PhD, I got this fellowship to come here to the United States in Boston. I was a visiting scholar at the Northeastern University. And that was the first time that I was visiting this country. So I didn't know what to expect. I was completely by myself. I was living in Boston, and I absolutely loved it because I think that here, really the richness of the mental health and physical health services and the willingness of people to learn, and I can see this from the number of participants today, is just unbelievable. And my PhD in Switzerland was more research oriented, and I really wanted to switch more towards clinical work. So anyway, I started then my postdoc in 2015, which was the worst winter ever, if you remember. So if I survive that one, I think I can stay here. And I had the amazing chance to work at the Child Trauma Training Center, which I will explain you in a little bit what we are doing there. I specialized in childhood trauma. And honestly, at the beginning, I was not really aiming to specialize in childhood trauma. It just happened. I knew that I wanted to work with children and adolescents. And my first internship during my postdoc was at Worcester Recovery Center and Hospital. And I don't know if you know about this hospital, but this is the longest term psychiatric facility for adults and also for adolescents. So I ended up at the adolescent units because this is what I wanted to learn. And they have an amazing trauma-informed program with awesome psychologists and psychiatrists. And that was the first place that I've heard the word, not heard the word, but really learned what it is, childhood trauma. And something really clicked in my mind because I'm a big believer that those experiences that happen in our lives, in our early childhood and adolescence, can really impact the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we see the world and other people. And so I think that just knowing what is trauma can be helpful for anyone and can help us to connect the dots and understand some of the behaviors and some of the reactions of the children and youth that we are working or living with and connect them to what happened to them. So I am going to share my screen right now, and I will share my PowerPoint. I hope you can all see that, right? Okay. And I would like to start this training by acknowledging the specificity of what is happening today. So we are in the midst of a pandemic, which is a completely new and unprecedented event for all of us. And it is already the 7th or 8th month of the pandemic, depending on the country or on the state where we are. And we're suffering from something that we call pandemic fatigue. We're starting to be tired. Now with the second wave, we're questioning, is this thing gonna ever end? Are we ever going to be back to the normality? So just acknowledging the additional stress that we are actually having on our shoulders, independently of what we are doing and who we are. And I'm just, again, so glad that people like Amy are putting these initiatives together during this time. And I would also like to start, since I don't know a lot about the audience, about your background, just curious to hear what are the things that would be helpful for you to learn today. And you can write them on the chat box, but just like popcorning, what would be helpful for you? What are you hoping to learn today?
Feel free to shout it out, anyone. Or type it in.
I know you're not expecting to put you on the spot right at the beginning.
we were, I think, wondering also, you know, are people here because they're parents of young children? Are you here because you're a daycare provider? You're a teacher, social worker, just someone who cares? Knowing that will help us. I know that we have Dodie and Eve and Beth. Some of the folks from the Together for Kids coalition are here, and that is group, a lot of people that are serving the youngest kids. sort of coming together for an advocacy platform and agenda. So of course, that's a great group to have here today, the advocates.
Absolutely.
Hi, Amy, it's Melanie. Is it okay if I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Melanie Tamburino, and I'm a program director for Community Action Inc., and we run the CFCE grant. And I'm here because it was on the CFCE Facebook page, excuse me. And what I was hoping to learn with when I saw trauma and training in early childhood, the first thing that came in my mind, and I'm hoping that you might talk about it, is children's social emotional needs, that we are very geared on teaching parents that they're first and most important teacher of their child's life. And we teach social emotional needs to the parents before the pandemic. So I'm hoping if you would talk about, if you did plan, you know, I'm a little bit worried about all children's social emotional development with this, and what we would see behavioral wise after the pandemic. And children, where they would go to school and not have behaviors, are they going to come back and have behaviors because they're getting used to a different routine? And are we going to see a rise on behavioral specialists in the schools?
Great question. Thank you so much. And definitely we will talk a little bit about what to expect. We'll talk a little bit about what are some of the common reactions of the children that we're witnessing right now. And I know that it's a big concern among a lot of adults about the social emotional development and how can we promote that sense of resiliency among kids. So that's great. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Moirimo Masharia, and really my expectations today probably are twofold as a parent, because this is information you also use at home with your own children, but also as an enthusiast with community dialogues and conversations. This is just like a platform or an opportunity to equip myself, even as I interact with people on different platforms, to, you know, to just have that knowledge. Because right now, it doesn't, I think with the pandemic, we've come to learn right now, you just need to be there. It doesn't take an expert anymore in any of our fields to be able to reach out now. So I think it's just amazing that this trainings happen for everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying this. And a couple of things. Thank you for representing also those people who are here as parents, or those people who are here as community. To all of us, it's a traumatic experience for all of us, and it doesn't matter anymore who you are. We can all voice and help each other in any ways, and these are exactly the ways how can we share the knowledge and then go out in our communities and in our homes and transfer the knowledge. So I'm really hoping that all the tools, the second part of the training will be on tools and practical strategies. And I'm hoping that all of these things you can think of how can you adapt them based on the role and relationship that you have with those kids and families. So definitely.
I have a question. This is Cecile. I was just wondering, the trauma that we're talking about today, can we use it towards elderly people, like your aunts and your mothers and your fathers and your grandfathers? Can you use the same conversation with them?
Absolutely, yes. So what I will be talking today will be definitely the trauma that happened in early childhood and adolescence, and we will be covering this entire age group. Okay. From 0 to 18, but definitely trauma that happens in that age can really affect people's lives also as adults. And so probably a lot of the concepts that you will hear could be applicable also to the adults. So definitely, yes. Okay. And feel free to ask questions during the training about adaptations. Okay, so someone would like to learn more about practices to support youth. Great. To find strategies interacting with youth. Okay, perfect. So thank you very much. It was lovely hearing your voices, and please feel free to interrupt me at any point. I really would like to make this training as much as interactive as possible, because it is already difficult to do these things online and we are really missing the physical presence of each other. So I'm not going to be offended if you interrupt me and you shout out loud any questions, or if you also had some experiences. I think it will be really great to bring into this training some real experiences from people. So really feel free to bring your own cases or scenarios or anything that it's kind of ringing the bell as I will be going through the slides. Okay, so the goals of this presentation: during the first part, I will be talking about what is childhood trauma and how childhood trauma is impacting the development of children and youth. We'll be talking about some specific behaviors, emotions, symptoms that we are seeing, how the pandemic is influencing all these things. And then in the second part of the training, I would like to talk about some specific strategies and tools that you can use as a professional, as a parent, as a community leader to help kids and families with trauma. So I will be talking about some concepts that we use in our field that will be helpful in addressing some conversations and challenges, as well as I'll be showing some practical tools that people can use literally online or at home. And if some of you is interested in something particular, I'm completely available even after the training. We can always set up a time to talk and dive into a more kind of into the specific tools. So just a couple of words about where I'm coming from and who am I representing today. I work at the Child Trauma Training Center. We are part of the Department of Psychiatry at UMass, and we are a member of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And the really nice thing about being part of this network is that this is the biggest network in the country about childhood trauma. I will talk in a little bit about the network, but all the slides that you will see today, all these concepts are coming from that network. And it gives us access to a very high quality and cutting edge type of interventions. So what we are doing in our center is, first of all, we are doing a lot of trainings. I believe that we are, if not the biggest, one of the biggest training centers in the state. And we work with any type of professionals or caregivers who are working with youth, with kids and adolescents. And our hope is really to raise this awareness about how childhood trauma can impact the mental and physical health of kids. We also have a neutral centralized referral system, which might be helpful for some of you. And essentially, we have a phone number that I can give you at the end, or just feel free to contact me, that you can call for free. And we will bridge, or we will connect a child or a family who is experiencing or had experienced some traumatic event to specific agencies and clinicians that are trauma trained. And then we are disseminating trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm an international trainer of this therapy. And so far, this is the most evidence-based practice that we know for kids and adolescents with trauma. So a lot of my clinical experience and expertise is actually coming from this model. So the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, maybe you're familiar with it, but if you aren't, I would strongly recommend you to visit their website. It is an unbelievable resource for anyone out there who would like to learn more about trauma. They have just hundreds, thousands of handouts that are really easy to read. If I can understand them, anyone could. Just like 1 or 2 pages. And then you have webinars if you would like to dive a little bit deeper. And as I said, this is the network that basically combines all the centers nationally that are working on childhood trauma. So why kids and families who are coming from lower socioeconomical status, from minorities, from traumatic experiences, why are they actually so impacted by the pandemic? So this is the socio-ecological model that basically explains that what we are going through right now is impacting us and those families on a variety of levels. So we know that kids who are at risk of trauma, right now, there is even higher risk of being abused, of being neglected. And this is because the families are going through unbelievable amount of stress, right? So if we had that family where there was already an abusive relationship, now people have been stuck together for months, and that abuse and that neglect could be exacerbated. We had a lot of parents losing their jobs where already they were barely making it at the end of the month, which is adding on the stress. We know from our child protection services at UMass that the reports for child abuse and neglect during the pandemic dropped out with 70%. But that doesn't mean that abuse and neglect is not happening. Actually, it's the other way around. But the problem is there are no eyes that can witness and that can look for that. The pandemic impacted our communities. We are no longer able to have access to those places, to those people that were a source of support for us and for those kids. And also on the level of the society, we are losing the trust in each other. Everyone else is perceived as a threat without talking about government and policies and all that. Who are the kids who are at higher risk during this pandemic? So definitely, if we think about those kids who are already predisposed of anxiety or depression, the pandemic can bring up even more those symptoms, right? Kids with learning or attention deficit disorders, definitely children who are at risk of abuse and neglect, and we just talked about that why. Kids who are more vulnerable to COVID, and we know from a lot of studies that trauma makes people more vulnerable to infections like COVID, or kids whose parents are working in high-risk environment, right? So just paying attention to who might be those children and families that might be more at risk. These are just some numbers, again, setting up the setting why we have to pay attention more, and not only, of course, but why children with trauma are so vulnerable. So these are some staggering numbers that are coming from this year. We know that almost 500,000 of children are currently in foster homes. And for foster parents, it's a huge stress to deal with the pandemic and foster kids. We know that 43,000 youth are in juvenile justice facilities where the whole program had to adapt based on the pandemic. Almost 3 million children are living in the care of grandparents, and grandparents are high-risk group. 5 million children living with at least one unauthorized immigrant parent. So we are seeing these big, big numbers of those kids who are actually in need of support right now. Now, I would like to turn it again back to you. You can use the chat or you can just share. But I would like to ask people, when you hear the word trauma, what does that mean to you? And I know that the word trauma often is a very traumatic kind of word, but what is the meaning of trauma for you? You can just popcorn with one word.
For me, trauma is any event, I guess, that happens to someone or someone's where it usually results in a fight or flight response that turns into some kind of physical or emotional, mental behaviors afterwards that don't necessarily go away. So it becomes chronic.
Thank you so much, Bill. So you're saying it's an event that it's causing some physiological, emotional, behavioral consequences after that, yeah? Other people? An event, inability to cope, hurt experience that creates an undeniable mark on the survivor, negative impact, toxic stress, absolutely. Great, thank you. So I would like to give the, go ahead.
Okay. I also think that trauma can, depending on the person, it can kind of end up being a state of mind, because you can have an event, you can have a memory, you can have a sensation in your life journey that can affect you for the rest of your life. And sometimes it can be something that some people may consider to be small, but to that person, it is like really, really huge. So I think it has an everlasting effect, not only on your mind, but also on your heart.
Thank you, Tina, for saying that. And you are pointing out something really important, that trauma can be subjective. So what is traumatizing for me might not be traumatizing for you, right? But still, it could be very traumatic for me as well. So just keeping in mind the different impact that trauma can have on people. Thank you.
You're welcome.
To me, is an emotional response to any event. This can cause PTSD. Trauma can be short-term or long-term stressor that person does not have ability to cope with. Absolutely. Thank you so much for being so interactive and sharing these experiences. And I would like just to share the definition that we use in the field of mental health, that trauma is the experience of a real or perceived threat to life or bodily integrity, or the life or bodily integrity of a loved one. So here we can see already that trauma can be real, but could be also a perceived type of experience. So that kid that is coming from a place with domestic violence, even though that domestic violence is not directly on the kid, that kid is perceiving threat on their own life or the life of their parents. And what differentiates a traumatic experience from a stressful event is that trauma causes this overwhelming sense of terror, of horror, of hopelessness. And very often, kids who are experiencing trauma have a huge physiological reaction in their body that could be even more traumatizing than the event of themselves. Kids may lose the control over their body because of the fear, because of the shock. There is a huge physiological response that could be pretty profound. Even though we have this kind of nicely defined definition of trauma, the reality is that trauma is could be very subtle, very invisible, and very common type of phenomenon, unfortunately. Trauma can happen in places that we would never expect it to happen. And there are different types of trauma, but to make it easier, we differentiate interpersonal type of trauma, which is that type of trauma that it's caused by someone. So someone did something or didn't do something on the child, and non-interpersonal trauma. And the interpersonal trauma, it's pretty hard to digest, because if you think about a child who is completely dependent on their caregivers and they trust their caregivers, and then that same caregiver abuses you, that can cause a profound impact on their brain and on their functioning. Neglect is another type of trauma that we often neglect, because while with other types of trauma, there might be some visible sort of consequences or effects. Neglect is something really invisible. And for many children, it might be normal. They don't really know what is different in parenting. For them, it might be normal that they're just left alone. But it was really interesting when I was reading some research around neglect. It showed that basically the impact of neglect on the brain structure and function of the child is very similar to the one of physical abuse. Homelessness, community violence are other types of trauma. In our center, we do a lot of research, and what we see that almost 40% of the children who are referred to our services are coming from parents with problems with substance abuse. So parents who are impacted by substance abuse or severe mental health disorders could be also traumatizing for children. Of course, all the racial disparities that we have, the systemic trauma, the impact of COVID-19 could be all additional and profoundly traumatizing things for kids. The reality is that, unfortunately, very often the kids who are walking in our offices, the kids that you are probably working or seeing with, they rarely came to us with only one type of trauma. And we talk about complex trauma when we refer to that type of event that happens in a very early age of the development of the child, usually less than 6 years old, when the child is still developing. That happens within the caregiving system. So again, the trauma is caused by someone who was supposed to take care of that kid. And that lasted for a long period of time. So that could be the child who was sexually abused from age 5 up until age 14 by a cousin. It could be a child who lived in domestic violence for years and so forth. What is happening is that when we have this complex type of trauma coming from the caregiving system, there is an interruption in the attachment relationship between the child and the adult. And we know that in order to have a healthy child, we need a good attachment with the caregiver. And it doesn't have to be a parent. If you imagine a toddler that is crying in their crib because they're hungry and thirsty, and then we have the mom who comes in the room and takes this toddler and hugs them and cuddles them, what is happening is that this mother is regulating the child. They are soothing the child. They are giving them to eat, but also with the voice of the mother, with the touch of the mother. This child is learning that my emotions are manageable. There are adults who are here to help me, and I'm learning how to soothe myself. But if we have this same child who is left in that crib for hours and hours to cry, and then we have mom coming in who is not only not taking that kid, but it's yelling at him or ignoring him, what is that child receiving as a message? Number one, my emotions doesn't matter. And then we have the kids who don't know what they're feeling because they've learned that they can't trust their emotions or that it's not good to show their emotions. I am unlovable, and my own parents doesn't really care about me. And these kind of interruptions in the attachment are provoking an inability to regulate yourself, which is after that impacting a lot of different domains in the development of that child. So when we talk about trauma, we have to envision these huge different areas of the whole development of the child. So for example, kids with complex type of trauma, they may experience difficulties with attachment. So we may have the kid who is seeing you for the first time and jumping all over you and telling you how much they love you. Or we have the kid who is with their hoodies and barely keeping an eye contact with you, right? The biology of these kids is impacted. We know that early childhood trauma can impact 3 systems in our body. Number one, our immune system, and that's why a lot of these kids are more vulnerable to infections or to physical conditions. The brain structure, the brain development, the brain activity, and then also the epigenetics, right? So we see a lot of these somatic problems in kids. Emotional regulation, if that kid never learned how to soothe their emotions, if that kid never had that parent to turn towards who helped them to regulate themselves, they end up with these big emotions that they don't know what to do with them. Behavioral dysregulation. If I don't know how to manage my emotions, it will be very difficult for me to manage my behaviors. And so very often we see in these kids these temper tantrums or aggressive behavior or behavior that it's rather withdrawn or sort of isolated. Dissociation. In some severe forms of trauma, we may have kids who are actually disengaging from the reality. Right? I had this clinical example of a kid who was severely sexually abused by her stepfather and physically abused by him for a long period of time. And every time that she was remembering of what was happening, she will completely lose consciousness, lose awareness of the reality of her body. And it's pretty scary to see that thing. the cognitions of kids will be impacted. So trauma, it's almost like you're wearing these black sunglasses. So kids start to develop these negative thoughts about themselves, about the world, about other people. And last but not least, the sense of self is impacted. So many kids who had experienced trauma, they don't develop this sort of coherent and predictable sense of self. They experience a lot of feelings of shame and guilt, and their self-esteem is pretty low, which is a kind of a hard way to live your life. Now, maybe some of you have heard about the AC study. I will go very quickly through this study just to say that we started doing research on trauma 20 years ago, and it happened in a very interesting way because Dr. Felitti, who is the person that you can see on your left, was the director of a clinic for obesity. So he was treating people who were overweight. And what happened was that he started to notice that as soon as people started to lose their weight and achieved some outcomes, they will drop out of treatment. And he couldn't understand, why is this happening? And so one day he was just talking to one of his patients. He was collecting some information from her, and he asked her at what age she started to be sexually active, which was a common question that he would ask. And then she answered, well, when I was 5, then this is when my father started to sexually abuse me. And so something clicked in the head of Dr. Felitti, and he started to think that there might be some relationship between adverse childhood experiences and physical and mental health. And that probably some women, as this one with sexual abuse, their overweight might be some way to cope with the memories or with the emotions that would come up, and sort of keep also on guard maybe other people or males that might be attracted to them. So he started seeing some relationship between those two things. So they did this huge study. And basically what they've learned from their study was that, first of all, 50% of the people, sorry, this is not on this slide, but I'm just saying it out loud. They were investigating how much people had adverse childhood experiences in their lives. And then they were investigating the 10 most severe and common causes of death in the United States, which is what you're seeing here. And what they saw was that 50% of the people who are people like me and you, they said that they had at least one traumatic event in their lives, which means that from the 42 people that we are here together, 1 out of 2 between us probably had at least one traumatic event that happened in our lives. And the other thing that they saw was that the higher were the number of traumas in people's life, the higher were the risk of people developing eating disorders, self-injury, unsafe sexual behavior, drug abuse, alcoholism, suicide attempts. And they saw that there was a clear link between childhood adversity and early death. Because if you were traumatized in your early childhood, you might be at higher risk of developing risk behaviors, as those that we mentioned, using drugs, being unsafe, and so forth. That will put you at higher risk of developing certain diseases and early death. So this was the study that really gave the beginning of a lot of research studies on trauma. Now, when we talk about early childhood trauma, it is important to remember that trauma is an experience. Trauma is not something that we inherited, as it could be depression or heart disease, even though there are a lot of epigenetic studies showing that there is also something in the DNA that can change. But trauma is an experience. It is not a disorder. And so in order to understand trauma and how trauma plays out in children, it's important to understand the impact that trauma has on the brain and body on people. And so I would ask you to imagine right now that it's a nice sunny day outside, maybe a little warmer than today, and you decide to go to a little hike somewhere by yourself. You just want to take some time for yourself. And as you're walking, you see this giant snake coming right in front of you. I would like to ask you, what would be your reaction? Just popcorning, throwing some words out there. How would you feel in your body? What would you do?
It's time to run.
I scream and run. That's just me.
I would freeze.
I'd
Run or freeze. Yeah, freeze. Because sometimes
I'd be startled.
Startled. Yeah. Scared. Scream and my heart would race.
fight, flight, or freeze.
Fight, flight, freeze.
Right?
Just stop.
I'd come to an all stop.
Great. So I would ask you to remember to mute yourself after you say something so that we can hear each other. I won't be scared. Valdis are great. Yeah, some people won't be scared. Some people like snakes. Absolutely. Get away from it. Great answer. So you're clearly describing some reactions in your body, heart starting to race, and you may run or fight the snake or freeze. And I would like to ask you now that for some reason you decide the next day to go back to the same place, same sort of road for your hike. And I want to ask you, how do you think you will feel? Missy, I can't hear you.
Anxious.
Anxious.
Very, very anxious.
Absolutely. If you have a friend walking with you and talking to you, do you think that you will be fully able to focus your attention on them, or part of you will be still thinking about the snake?
No, I'd be carrying something to hurt that snake with, though. I would have something.
That's a
So if it gets me, I'm gonna get it back.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I wouldn't be able to focus on
other people are saying, right. So your mind will be taken away by maybe expecting the snake.
Right.
People are saying cautious, afraid to go back there. Yes, nervous, keep looking for it. Right. And now I want to ask you to imagine that you're going back again for some reason at that same place, and you are seeing something like a stick or branch of a tree that it's really similar to that snake, but it's not the snake. How do you think you'll feel?
Once bitten, twice shy. So let me just stop,
I would probably jump out of my skin, which is a reaction I have because I have PTSD and I have complex PTSD from very early, seeing domestic violence and alcoholism and drug use growing up. My father shot himself in the head when I was 6, and I felt relieved, and then I felt guilty for feeling relieved, but because of what he had done to my mother, I that's how I felt. And, so I think my first reaction would be to just jump.
To jump. Yeah, clearly you're describing.
Yeah, I get I'm very easily startled. I think I would get startled by seeing something like that.
Thank you, Missy, for being vulnerable and sharing with this life experience and these symptoms. Absolutely. So even though this is not the snake, you will probably have the same physiological reaction. And this is what is happening to a lot of these kids and people. They are walking around as there is a snake, even though there is no snake. And they may see in the sticks or in certain things snakes, even though there aren't. And in a way, this is safer because it is better for me to see a snake, even if it's not a snake, rather than not seeing a snake and then being exposed to that. So thank you very much for this great interaction and participation. And what is happening physiologically is that when we are in front of a threatening situation or danger, what is happening is that our brain starts producing some hormones because the main goal of our brain is to protect us. And so the brain starts releasing hormones like adrenaline or cortisol that helps our body to protect us and to react. And usually there are 3 types of ways that we react to danger, which probably you all know: the fight, flight, and freeze. Once the danger is removed, once that snake is not there anymore, our brain stops releasing those hormones and we get back to normal. When we have that snake in our houses, when we have that child who is coming from a place where there was domestic violence, where there are shootings around or drug use or anything that is happening on a daily basis, what's happening is that our brain keeps producing those hormones over and over again. And our internal alarm system is constantly on. And this is what we can see in a lot of kids, in a lot of people who are constantly in alert, constantly expecting something bad to happen. Or they might be withdrawn, they might be isolated, because this is their alarm system that is constantly on. And this is how they learned to cope with trauma. This is how our brain process in normal conditions. So between a stimuli and our reaction, there are a lot of different things that are happening in our brain, right? So if you imagine going out in Worcester, in downtown Worcester, for example, and you feel a smell of coffee, right? Your brain will engage in observing, in interpreting, oh, maybe that's coffee or maybe that's a latte, processing this information, evaluating options. So maybe I'll go and get a coffee from this coffee shop, or I'll just keep walking and go back home. Planning your actions, and only after you will act. So you go and get your coffee or you don't get your coffee, right? So there are a lot of different processes happening. When we are again in a dangerous situation, what is happening is that all these passages around are shut off and we are taking an immediate reaction. So if I am crossing the street and I see a truck coming in front of me, do I have the time to stop and think, oh, maybe if I turn right or left, maybe I'll escape? No, I am just running, right? And so when we are exposed to that continuous trauma, that express route becomes the normal one. And this is why we see a lot of kids who, as soon as they're triggered by something, they may react right immediately, because their alarm system is perceiving threat, even if there is no threat. And so the way how the brain develops, and I promise I'll make this very easy, and I'm not a neurologist, but the brain develops from the bottom up. So first we develop this limbic system of the brain, which is the one closest to the neck. And it's the one that it's responsible for all our survival needs. So if we are in front of a tiger, that's the part of the brain that it's gonna be activated. Or if we are hungry as a baby or thirsty, that's the part of the brain that will make us cry. And then we have the more complex part of the brain, which is this frontal lobe here, and that keeps developing up until age 25, 26, okay? And the way that our brain will develop, it will depend not only from our genes, but only from our experiences. So if you imagine the brain being formed by billions and billions of neurons, and these neurons forming different connections, okay? If you are repeating an experience, both good or bad, let's say if I have a baby, and if I talk to this baby in Bulgarian and in Italian and in English, probably I'll strengthen those regions of the brain of the baby that will be about understanding language or comprehension. Same thing is with bad experience. If you have this child who grew up in a place of, again, violence or neglect, probably they had to develop very well that part of the brain that it's the primitive part. And we have a lot of these kids who are actually very good in assessing threat. But they didn't have the time to really stay there and sit, who do I want to be when I become older? Or in which college do I want to apply, right? So we see a lot of these kids, they did not develop that prefrontal part of the brain, which is about abstract thinking or problem solving and so forth, which then impacts their learning, it impacts their attachment and so forth. So when we have those traumatic experiences, what is happening is this emphasis of those domains and skills that are about surviving the environment, Okay, so I am becoming really good in understanding any cues about threat, or I'm becoming really good to understand who is a safe person or unsafe person, or really good in fighting back. But then there is less emphasis on those domains of development that are not so relevant for that kid, right? So if we have the kid going to the kindergarten and they need to focus and learn how to read, but if at the same time they keep thinking about their younger sibling being at home and exposed to a parent who is abusing drugs or beating them up, that kid wouldn't be able to engage those parts of the brain and learn the reading, because they will be caught up in that survival mode and worrying. Now, it is important when we think about behaviors of kids that each type of behavior is addressing some sort of a need. And usually kids with their behaviors, they're addressing two types of need. One is the physiological type of need, which is hoarding food. For example, the kid who is hoarding food or stealing or having this intense attachment to object, they might be addressing that physiological need that was not satisfied earlier in life. And we see a lot of, for example, foster kids who keep hoarding food because they were deprived about that. Or behavior can address certain emotional needs. So if we have the kid who is lying, for example, that might come out from their need to be accepted by people or liked by people. Or the girl who learned that only through a seductive and sexualized behaviors, that's how they get the attention. But it's important to think about what is the type of need that that behavior is addressing. And when we think about children with traumatic experiences, usually we can identify those behaviors in two clusters. Number one, if we have that kid who is coming from a family where they didn't receive enough attentions, or the family didn't really meet their basic needs, probably their behaviors will be oriented to need fulfillment. So here you may have the manipulative kid. You may have the kid who is seeking more attentions, or again, sexualized behaviors, anything that will assure them that seeking about attentions or need fulfillment. Or if you have the child that is coming from an environment with too much danger or lack of safety, then their behaviors might be leading to avoid danger and seeking safety. So for example, the teenager using drugs, maybe they use drugs because that's the way how they cope with these overwhelming emotions, and they are seeking their safety in this way. Or the kid who is aggressive, maybe that's the kid who is sending the message, don't mess up with me because, you know, I can be aggressive and I can act here. So really thinking about what is the environment that this kid is coming from, and what this behavior, what is the type of need that this behavior is fulfilling. And this is what we can see in the surface. This is what we can see in kids who might be impulsive or aggressive, kids who might be having difficulties in learning or being socially withdrawn. This is just a table showing the response of trauma by different age groups. And what I would like to say here is that there is a lot of research showing how trauma can really impact the working memory, inhibitory control, and flexibility. So for example, in infants, we can see, for example, difficulty acquiring those developmental milestones, learning how to speak, learning how to coordinate, how to walk. And then we see that kid having frequent severe tantrums because they're frustrated. They don't know how to regulate themselves. And then maybe we end up diagnosing them with a reactive attachment disorder, right? Or the school-aged kids, we may see difficulties with acquisition and learning some certain skills at schools. And then that kid might end up having a lot of troubles being back on track or not being able to form those social relationships. And then again, we may have that kid diagnosed with ADHD or learning disorder, right? Or in adolescence, again, we see the kid who has difficulties again in learning certain things at school or being independent and acquiring those milestones that they need. And then we can throw even bigger diagnoses such as borderline personality disorder and so forth. So you can see how trauma can really impact the development of children. And if we don't get to the core of what is causing all these symptoms, then we can misdiagnose or not being able really to help them. When we talk about learning, trauma can definitely impact learning, and we can see this during also this period of time of online learning, because learning actually requires a lot of different skills, the skills of being able to focus your attention. So right now, I need to be focused on you and not thinking about what do I need to do after. Ability to regulate your emotions, your behaviors. And then if you have the kid with trauma who did not develop all these skills, then we can see these problems in concentrating, taking new information. We see the exhaustion, we see the sleepiness in them. And these are some talking about the pandemic. Some of you raised the question about what we can see right now during the pandemic. So these are certain things that we can see in younger kids right now. And really keeping in mind that the emotional and the behavioral dysregulation that we see in kids could be just the representation of the chaos in the environment right now. So in little kids during the pandemic, we can see more frequent crying, problems with falling asleep and staying asleep because kids might keep worrying what is happening or having nightmares. Little kids can become more clingy and having more difficulties with separation from parents, being afraid of being alone or developing some specific fears that they didn't have before, like from darkness or going to bed. Definitely certain kids might be more anxious and therefore distracted. We may expect difficulties with changes in the classroom routine. So for those kids after that, when we think about transitioning back to school, we have to be prepared to see a lot of those kind of difficulties to these changes, because now they got used to some different type of learning, and then going back with all the new procedures might be pretty difficult. Or any sort of big behavior, such as acting out the worry by being clingy, being withdrawn. We may see in little kids regressive type of behaviors, like acting on a younger age or just regressing into certain things that they used to do when they were little.
Is it okay if I say something?
Absolutely, yes. Sorry that I'm rushing. I just want to make sure I will cover all the slides.
All right. But as long as it stays confidential, but this is me talking as a parent now. What I've noticed, my daughter's 10, and she's becoming a little bit more clingy, and she wants to sleep with me at night. So as a parent, I don't want to not let her sleep in my bed, even though the pediatricians say don't let them co-sleep and don't let them sleep with you. But I think for me as a parent, it provides them as safety, security. So I let her and we'll snuggle. But then just to get out of it, what I did was I let her redecorate her room. So I asked her what she was interested in, and she said she didn't know. And I said, she had noticed you're taking a like to unicorns. Do you want to redecorate your room? So I took her out. I spent money I didn't have. And to be honest, but just to do that so she would sleep in her room. And she picked out all the little unicorn things and her bedding and her new area rug, and we decorated her room together. Now she's sleeping in her room at night, and I'm checking in on her. So that's what I noticed with this pandemic going on for her, for that age, just being a little bit more clingy that way.
More clingy. Thank you so much for sharing. And this is just a beautiful representation of how we have to personalize our interventions and really using our own judgment as parents, as professionals, what is best for this child. And you clearly sense that you allowing your kids to sleep with you at the beginning will provide that safety that then she can bring back and transitioning back to her room. So that was a great example. Thank you. Missy, you were raising your hand.
I just wanted to reply to that. I had similar issues with my daughter, and it was not anything to do with the pandemic. It was years ago. She's almost 22 now. But when she was younger, she had the same thing. You know, she got very clingy, wanted to sleep with me, and she was very smart. She actually made a slideshow of the reasons why she should be able to redo her room and what she wanted to do and what it would cost and like everything. And she was just little, but she did all this. And I'm like, you know what? How can I not?
Absolutely.
How can I not? And you know what? Changing your surroundings really does make a difference. I know, because I was in a very toxic relationship for over 7 years, and it just ended last December. And he did me a favor and took the trash out himself, because I probably would have continued. But I had all my rooms repainted, and just that, and my daughter came and ripped down all my light darkening curtains and put up shears, and it made such a difference. So changing your surroundings really can impact how you're feeling mentally, your emotional health. It really does. So I think you did the right thing, and you know, I mean, other people might have other opinions, I don't know, but I feel like you did the right thing for what was right for you and your child.
Well, thank you. That was very sweet. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Definitely. I can see also certain things on the chat. Amy, feel free to let me know if I'm missing something, and I'm so sorry if I'm missing some of your...
You're not missing anything. You are so on it. You don't even need my help at all.
Oh, I do. I always need your help.
I was just thinking, though, that every time I've done training on trauma too, we recognize that having early childhood trauma impacts the way you see other people, yourself, what's normal. So often people repeat these traumatic patterns in adulthood. So it's very, like, you're not alone if you're doing, like, it's very, very common. And part of the reason why getting help and support and treatment is so important at a young age, save you sort of the heartache of dealing with it all in adulthood.
Well, yeah. And you know what else I did, if it's okay if I chime in again? I also, too, back in April, where I saw this, I reached out to her primary, and I have a counselor for her. We don't have Zoom at home, so she talks to a counselor once a week over the phone. And that now I'm getting a behavioralist once a week to come into the home, because I want her to have an easy transition back to school when she does go back to school. So I figured all the extra help I can get right now will be good for her instead of waiting until later.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. And remembering that the fortune of working with kids, having kids, is that they're still developing. So doing any intervention in this point could be critical. And I believe that especially now with the pandemic and all the changes, this is so needed. So thank you. Honestly, I'm just thinking about the cultural differences, and I'll just say that and get back to the PowerPoint. How culture is important. And one of the things that I really like here in the US is that even though maybe, you know, there could be still a lot of improvement, but mental health is considered and therapy is taken in consideration. I'm coming from Bulgaria, where unfortunately still a lot of people are very skeptical about therapy and psychologists and all these kind of things. And culture really impacts, and also the family, having parents like you who are taking in consideration the emotional and social needs of your child is just amazing. Amy, I just would like to, I'm aware of the time, and I know that I promised that I'll keep this up until 1:30, 1:15, 1:30. I still have a lot of cool slides that I would like to share with people. If we go a little further, is that okay for everyone?
I think that's great. People have been asking questions as you've gone, so I don't feel like anybody's, you know, kind of holding their thoughts till the end. So absolutely. And then I think we had said that we were thinking about having you come back again in December. So
of course,
if you don't get it all, if you don't get to it all, we will hang in there.
Absolutely. And I would encourage people who are today here at this training to take notes. If you would like to dive into something deeper for the next training, just let Amy know so that we can plan accordingly. All right, great. So I'll transition to the second part of our training today, which will be more focused on some practical strategies and some concepts to keep in mind when we are relating in any type of role with our kids. I would also like to remind you that all of the strategies that I will be walking through and talking about could be applicable also to you, because this is a period of time that we have to be mindful also of ourselves and how can we take care of ourselves as well. So as I will be walking through some relaxation strategies or mindfulness strategies, I would invite you to also take a moment and think about how can you use them for yourself. Okay, so the first rule of thumb that we would like to share is that when we are in front of difficult behaviors of kids, because some of those behaviors could be really challenging, it is important to be curious and not furious, and to know that it is not about you. So if we can enter in this attitude of curiosity and thinking about why is this behavior happening? Why is this child acting in the way that they do will be fundamental. And thinking that, as we talked in the previous slides, behaviors usually most of the time make sense. So if you can track and make some sort of behavioral little analysis as a little detective and thinking about what is the function of that behavior. Okay, so my daughter started throwing this temper tantrum when she came to my house, for example, after being with her dad for a week. And what triggered that behavior? And what was the result? The result was that I got mad and I gave her some negative attentions, right? Thinking about what are the underneath emotions. So when we see a child that is, for example, angry, maybe beneath that anger is a sense of loss, a sense of fear, and they don't know how to express that. Thinking about what might be the thoughts running through their heads right now. And we will be talking about thoughts and emotions in a little bit. And in psychology, probably most of you have heard this concept of the cognitive triangle. And the idea here is that any type of situation that happens is evoking certain thoughts inside of us, emotions, and behaviors. And those three things are connected between them. Okay, so if I wake up in the morning and I see outside pouring and really dark, bad weather, and if I tell to myself, oh, today it's gonna be a horrible day and I won't be able to get anything done, probably those thoughts will make me feel more depressed and anxious. And then I might end up staying in bed all day, which will confirm my initial thought that today is a bad day. Right? And so the idea here is to think about what might be those thoughts and emotions that are underneath the behavior. And so I would like to do this little exercise with you. So you can use the chat box or just jump right after in. And I want you to imagine the following situation. You can imagine that you're a teenager walking in a school or you're working somewhere. But imagine that you are walking in the school or in the building of your work, and you see two of your good friends talking between each other, laughing, but not acknowledging you and not saying hello to you. What might be your thoughts in front of that situation? You walk in the school or the building that you work, and you see two of your friends or really good colleagues kind of not acknowledging you and whispering between them and laughing. What would be your thoughts?
Yeah, I probably gonna think about, they are talking about me, or they might talking about someone else and they don't want me to know about. There is a secret going on out there, but they don't want to involve me in that. Or just like they don't like me.
Perfect. Thank you. So they don't like me. Are they talking about me? Are they keeping a secret? Okay. And now, if you don't mind, I would like to ask you, if you are having these thoughts, okay, what might be, I just need to, this is not coming back. What might be the way that you will feel if you think, are they talking about me? They don't like me. Are they keeping a secret from me? What might be your emotions?
I will feel that hurt, like my feelings being hurt because I thought that they were my friends. Betrayed.
Yeah.
And sad, you know.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rami.
Any
thinking that they are talking about you or they don't like you, what do you think would be your behavior? What would you do?
Well, if I really believe that that's what's happening, then I might become isolated from them.
Mm-hmm.
I might don't say hello to them when I see them next time.
Right.
And probably stop talking to them.
Yeah.
In my head, I'm thinking that they have something against me.
Absolutely.
Completely wrong.
Yeah, but see how your initial thoughts will impact even your behavior, and you might start not even talking to them. And how is this gonna affect your relationship and friendship with them? Great. So now I would like to ask you, and just give me a second here. Okay. And for some reason, every time that I do this, so bear with me a second, because every time that I do this, my PowerPoint is getting stuck. So I need to now stop sharing. Just give me a second and I'll be right back.
No problem. Technology difficulty is part of the training.
I know, right? Okay. Now, I would like to ask you, and we're back here, what might be another way of thinking? So you are in front of the same situation, but what might be some other way that you may think about it?
I might just come to them and say, hey, what is going on?
But what might be another way of thinking, like some other thoughts that you might be having?
Okay, so.
Can you share with us something else that you may think?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Someone is drawing on our board. If you can, what would be another way of thinking? What might be another way for you to see the situation? Like what, before you were saying that you may think that they don't like you or they are keeping some secret. What might be another way of seeing that situation?
That, I don't know, I can't think about something other than just thinking about, you know, wanted to be part of the conversation. Like, oh, hey, I want to know, just being curious about what they're talking about.
Great. So maybe you will think, oh, maybe they're talking about something really interesting, right? Mm-hmm. And if you think in that way, oh, maybe they're actually talking about something interesting, I wonder what it is. How would you feel, Romy?
And in that case,
what would be the way that you
different than before, because now I want to be part of the conversation and I wanted to approach them and like, hey, can I come to you, and not feeling like I'm being excluded.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna feel included.
Right. So your behavior will be completely different if you change the way that you are thinking. Right. So that was great. That was great. And this is exactly what we mean, that very often we end up with feelings, and those kids end up with feelings because of certain way that they think about situation. People don't like me. And so if I think that people don't like me, I might end up feeling angry and sad, and then I'll be rather avoiding people. But if we can help children to shift and say like, wait a minute, maybe Rami is having a bad day right now. Maybe she's worried about something and that's why she's not saying hello to me. Then I will end up feeling maybe worried about you and I might come and approach you, which will change completely my relationship with you. So thank you so much for volunteering. That was awesome. And it was just an illustration about this idea of the connections between the way that we think, the way that we feel, and how we react.
Thank you.
That was great. And so very often with kids with trauma, what we see is just the tip of an iceberg. The behavior that we see, the avoidance, the impulsivity, the defensiveness is just the tip of the iceberg. But if we can go a little deeper, as we just did, and see what are the emotions that this kid is experiencing right now? Maybe they're really insecure. Maybe they're really anxious. What are they thinking? What are their expectations and beliefs? Then we can see those behaviors in a very different way. And if there is one message that I would like to convey with today's training to you, is that it is really important when we are in front of those difficult behaviors, right, and they could go from the extreme of aggression to being isolated and depressed, if we can shift the perspective and instead of thinking what is wrong with you, which is a normal question that we may have, and say what happened to you so that you are having those reactions, that can be a really powerful tool for us to approach those kids and people in a different way. Now, I would like to talk about strategies again, following this framework of the three main factors that during this pandemic right now, and especially with kids with trauma, is important to keep in mind. And there are three things that it's really fundamental to convey. And those are the sense of safety, sense of connectedness, and regulation. So when we talk about safety, this is the belief that my needs and your needs are met. And the sense of safety with kids with trauma is severely compromised. And so when we think about that fight, flight, and freeze response, when you're in that defensive mode, there is actually a fourth way of reacting to a dangerous situation, which is the affiliate response. And that is the response when we actually seek the help from other people. If I'm threatened by something, I will call Amy and I'll ask her for help, or I'll call my mom or my sister and ask for help. And so in order for the child to switch towards that affiliate response and to explore relationships and to learn other ways to deal with threat, it is important to provide a safe environment. And so there is a difference between physical safety and physiological safety. So when we talk about physical safety, this is something that we automatically do. We are doing very well right now, right? Wearing a mask, making sure we disinfect everything. But there is also something that we call a psychological safety, which is the feeling of me being safe in my body, knowing how to regulate myself, how to have the sense of control with myself. And so that's something fundamental that we need to help kids right now. And so the concept of the emotional container is something that we teach to parents, but I believe that this is something really crucial for any type of adult dealing with kids. When we are in front of a child with some sort of difficult behavior, very often we just want to jump in and fix it and say like, don't worry, everything will be okay, or don't cry or whatever. But if we can take a step back and create that sense and space of safety where we are there and we are containing that child with all the emotions that they have without trying to change the emotions, without trying to fix the problem, this will be actually the first step that will help the child to change, because that's how you will make them feel validated and contained in their experience. And this is a difficult thing to do because it requires also us as adults to be aware of the urges that we may have, to be aware of the triggers that this child is evoking in us. So how to be an emotional container? So there are three main steps, and these are reflect, validate, and normalize. So when you are in front of a difficult behavior of a child, and here I mean any type of behavior, it is important to, first of all, maybe ignore the negative behavior and focus on what that kid might be feeling right now. And then give and put words into the feelings, especially kids with trauma. They never learned how to identify their feelings. And so if you can say something like, wow, Johnny, it looks like your energy is really high right now. Or it sounds like you're really frustrated. What we are doing is we are labeling the feeling, not the behavior. The second step is validation. Many of the kids with trauma are coming from families where they have been completely invalidated in what they feel, in what they're experiencing. And so saying something like, well, of course, it makes sense that you're upset because you are in your dad's house right now. You're with me. And tomorrow you have to go back to mom. Let's say this is a kid with divorced parents and you're upset, right? And of course it makes sense. And then normalizing, saying something around, you know, I know how many kids are struggling right now with this homeschooling and not being able to see your friends. And this is completely normal what you're experiencing, right? So providing that sense of validation and normalization will soften the kid and will make them feel felt, right? Which is some of the most important thing that we want to achieve. I don't think that we will have the time, unfortunately. I prepared a couple of videos for you. This one is really cool if you can Google it, or I can send you the link later, which is, it is not about the nail. It really explains very nicely this idea of the emotional container. But again, I can send it to you through the chat. I just want to make sure that we can keep the interaction instead of only watching videos. The second factor is connectedness. And we know how much during this pandemic with the social isolation and physical distancing, we are keeping our physical safety. But again, we are completely deprived by our freedom to be with other people, to participate in those activities and be in those places that were sort of support for us and for our children. And so one of the fundamental things right now is to keep that sense of connectedness. And all the studies, all the meta-analyses and randomized controlled clinical trials out there, everything is showing us that the number one factor for healing, number one factor to help a child is the presence of a supportive and stable relationship with a caregiver. And the good news is that this caregiver doesn't have to be the parent. It could be any sort of caregiver. All of us here, if we can create that network around the child, keeping those connections and providing them with a different experience, this is how a child can heal and change the way that they think of themselves and the world. We talked already about how trauma can affect the way that kids will think about themselves, about the world, and about the others. And we talk about this concept of the invisible suitcase, which basically means that very often the kids who are coming to us, the kids that we work with, kids with traumatic experiences, they walk with this invisible suitcase. If you imagine a child in foster home, right? They arrive with their backpack with clothes, but they also hold this invisible suitcase, which is full of those beliefs of themselves and the others that are based on their traumatic experiences. And so these are some examples of those things that are in this invisible suitcase. Very often kids believe that it's unsafe being vulnerable in front of other people because they will betray my feelings, or nobody loves me, or I am a bad person, or I deserve to be treated in the way that I'm treated, right?
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Can you please go back to the last slide before this one? Pretty please. Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. Can I switch now?
Yes,
or you wanted me to explain this slide. This is a little bit what I said earlier, that when we have a traumatic experience, as any other experience, but specifically early childhood trauma, is almost like wearing these black sunglasses. And that profoundly affects the way that kids will think about themselves, right? Because the way that I think of myself will be coming from my past experiences. So if I had my parents who didn't take care of me because they had their own issues of, I don't know, mental health illness or drug abuse or whatever, I will start to believe that there is something wrong in me. And kids usually make sense of what's happening around them by internalizing the responsibility towards them, because it is better if I believe that I am unlovable instead of believing that my mother doesn't love me or that she's not a good mother, okay? So the sense of self is compromised. That's why we see kids who doesn't have a good self-esteem. They believe that they're broken forever, that they're dirty. Trauma impacts the way that kids see the world, okay? So if bad things happened over and over to me, I will start to believe that this world is not a safe place. The world is not a good place to be. And trauma impacts the way that I see the others, the way that I relate to others. So if I didn't have those positive relationships, that attachment in my early childhood, then I will think that I can't really trust anyone else. I have to watch out, right? Or maybe that's the normal way of being with someone who is abusive to me or neglecting my own needs, right? So that's the idea, that trauma can affect those three fundamental factors. And the idea of this invisible suitcase is that these beliefs are walking with the child, and it's not you who created those beliefs. And so thinking about the fact that the way that we talk to our children become their inner voice, right? And so if you have the kid who is being told to shut up, that you're so mean, you're selfish, you're stupid, they will have a very different invisible suitcase compared to a child that was nourished, to a child who was seeing their capabilities and what they're doing. And again, the good news is that we can get that development back on track. We can influence the way that kids think about themselves and relate to the world. And there are three main things that we can do: making them feel safe, capable, and lovable. So if we can convey the message to the child that you are safe by verbally saying it, by creating that safe place, then the child will start realizing that maybe the world is not such a dangerous place, and maybe the world could be also safe. If we are able to detect and see, what is that kid good at? Are they good in arts? Are they good in social skills? Anything that is good, then we can reinforce their sense of self-esteem, and they will feel capable to navigate the world. And if we can convey a sense of love and affection to those kids, this is how they will learn how to feel worthy of loving. I see a lot of things in the chat, and I don't want to miss out anything that you are saying, but I see that Amy is on the top of all these comments here. So Amy, let me know if I need to jump on anything.
I think people were just validating what you said, that this resonates for them. They have these experiences of these childhood traumas influence those domains, like you said, how safe you feel, how lovable and capable. And people just appreciating that this information is being given because it's relevant.
Perfect. And I'll send you all the PowerPoints and all that later. So how can we repack that suitcase? How can we make those kids feeling safe, capable, and lovable? And maybe I would like to hear from one of you, if you have your own examples of the kids that you have been working with, or your own kids. How do you convey those safe, capable, and lovable? Anyone who would like to jump in or share on the chat?
I don't mind sharing. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you for jumping in.
Hi, my name is, I work with kids. I have a nonprofit and I do different, well, BC before COVID, to different groups concerning trauma with adults as well as children, working in libraries and some museums. So I literally have had a suitcase, and with my youth groups, a lot of feelings when we're talking about this pops up. And they get upset and they get agitated. So instead of, like you were saying, being like, well, you're acting out, or I don't like how you're acting, I ask them, what's going on? And with art, it's really helpful. So I ask them to draw what they're feeling right now. And then I ask them to identify, like, well, why do you think you're feeling this right now? And what are ways that we can address this in a different way? How would you want somebody to do how would you want somebody to address this with you? Is because I'm now trying to get them to see that I don't want it to be about you, but I want it to be about the behavior, and how do you address this another way? And that seems to work. And then we get like a scarf, and we write on that scarf what the behavior could be another time. So if they're feeling unsafe or they're feeling angry, they can now go and get that literal scarf and they can wrap it around themselves. And it's like, okay, so now you are reformatting I call it re-storytelling. So they're reformatting their behavior and repacking it in other behavior. And it's over a course of time, but little by little, they're like, oh, and then they accumulate these scarves, and they're really colorful, and I have them write messages on them too. And
wow. This is such a powerful intervention, and I believe so much in expressive arts and how this can help kids to really express their emotions. And I never heard about using a scarf, and there is something so symbolic about the scarf that it's warming you up and you just hold around your neck and then having those messages. It's great example. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sorry if I chime in, you're probably sick of hearing me talk.
I am not sick of hearing you talk at all. I'm happy.
So I don't know how to get around this one. I'm still working on it. This is personal, so whatever I say here, please just keep in this, chat. But I'm a single parent, and we have really rotten neighbors, and they verbally attack my daughter, and this is part of what we talk about in counseling, and she does not want to go outside anymore. So now we're trying to work on how to get her back outside in the yard. So this, to me, I'm thinking of her in this aspect of, how can we repack the suitcase? And I like what I'm sorry, I forgot the other person's name who just spoke, the suitcase, because I might try that with her, getting a real suitcase, one that she likes, and she has scarves, and maybe doing that feeling thing with her to get her to go back outside and play in her yard. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Just to help you out, this is a quick tip. Check out your Salvation Armies, because they have a lot of suitcases, and then you can clean them if you so want. And then there's always Marshalls and such, and just like the scarves that you can have. You can use reusable markers, but however you choose, it totally. I'm just going the more economic route because.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
I also have something I wanted to say.
If everybody else wants to throw in $2 a piece, and I bet you'll get your suitcase. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, there was someone else who was trying to say something. I'm not sure.
Go ahead, Tina. Jump on in.
Oh, okay. I didn't want to interrupt the other person that was speaking. Did I interrupt them? Sorry. Did I? Hope not.
No.
Did the other person finish?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I have a few things I want to say about all of this. One of the things that had occurred to me, because I've seen it a gazillion times, that might be added to that invisible suitcase, is the kid goes around with everything that happens that is wrong in the world is because of me. I have seen it 500 million times. And for the very wonderful lady that was talking about ways to get her daughter to go back outside, when I've had that exact circumstance, and actually one of the things that I've done with that is I have the kid and we sit down and we create a scavenger hunt. And they choose what items are going to be found, which part of outside they want to go by. Sometimes it can be really big, like 10 items. Sometimes it can be small, like 2 or 3. In the beginning, it will probably just be small, like 2 or 3, but it gets them outside. They have a part in the decision-making process, and it's just so much fun, and they love it. And then as the thing went on, we added it, and it went from maybe 5 or 10 minutes to almost an hour of just enjoying and having pure joy and interacting with one another. And then the last thing I wanted to say very quickly, because I know it's going fast, is having an acting background and being an artistic director. The other thing that I've done that works so well is you find out what the kid's favorite color is, and you get those little Post-its and your pen pals. And if the kid's having a not so cool day, they come up and will literally stick a Post-it on your forehead or on your hand or on your shoulder, and it only has one word on it, and it just says talk. And that's it. And that lets you know that the other person wants to communicate something to you. And then you find a time, and it's always child-led, and you let the kid know that you respect them enough to carve out a positive space for them. It lets them know that they're valued, and it lets them know that they can trust you.
Thank you so much, Tina. You mentioned so many different things: empowering the child, giving them choices and the ability to speak, while also being that safe adult and providing really that safe place.
Oh, you're welcome.
Someone also mentioned something that I really liked about lots of reassurance conversations and delegate duties. I think reassurance, it's absolutely something important, and we will talk about that. And really keeping and verbalizing, you know, you're safe, and we're here for you. And there are adults dealing with those things. So that's amazing. Yeah, I also loved everything that you guys said. I wish we had much more time to chat, so I have to move on with the slides because I want to show you also other things. Bill just raised his hand, so I would like to hear Bill.
Yeah, it's kind of a two-part question. I guess I wonder, you might have a child. So I'm going to describe 3 different kids. You have one kid who definitely is experiencing some trauma. Same kid, but they have maybe some kind of attention deficit disorder. And then you have the third kid who's just, you know what, I've got a birthday party this afternoon, so I'm just not paying attention, or I'm acting out. How do you go about trying to figure out where these 3 different kids are coming from? And then I guess the second part of the question is, being that I work in a lot of environments where it could be a small, simple private program or scouts or something like that, where we don't have the benefit of having a counselor or a therapist or a big head down the hall that we can actually run this stuff by. So what do we do when we're lay people who don't necessarily have all of these, a person with all these tools readily available, above the ones that we can, bring in ourselves?
Yeah. Great question, Bill. So I hope that with this presentation, all these things that we are talking about right now could be actually things that you can do. So definitely thinking about how can you make those kids feel safe, capable, and lovable. We'll talk about how to give reassurance, how to keep routines. We'll get in a little bit into also even more specific tools. And the first question that you raised, it's really different. It's really interesting because we know that some kids who have been going through trauma, they do perfectly well, right? So you can have 2 siblings who have been going through the same type of traumatic event, and then one of them becomes anxious or depressed or sort of acting out, but then the other one is just fine. And that's why we talk about resiliency. And the idea is that there are a lot of factors that are coming from genetics, so the temperament of the child, internal factors, like, for example, is that child being exposed to previous traumas? Is that child been having mental health issues, right? And the external environment, right? The presence of a supportive caregiver or lack of resources, right? So it's a combination of different internal and external factors between biology and context that will determine how each of those child will react. So, so thank you for this question. I believe that we'll need another webinar to talk about resiliency and those factors, but definitely each child will will react in a very different way. So working with parents, a couple of things to remind us is that right now the parental stress is absolutely high. So we work with people who are really stressed out, as we are. And so it is important to help, for those of you who are working with caregivers or for those of you who are relating to other parents, it's important to help people regulate. So right now, it is important, as some of you mentioned at the beginning, to switch towards social emotional skills, but also to help the caregiver to regulate, right? So if you want a regulated child, you need a regulated caregiver. A lot of parents are very worried about their kids not learning well during this pandemic and through online schooling. But it's really fundamental to explain to parents that if your kid is completely dysregulated, right, it will be very difficult for them to learn how to do math. So switching the perspective towards how can we use this period of time to foster those social and emotional skills in kids. This is another really nice video that unfortunately we won't have the time to watch. Amy will make sure to send to people the link, but this is a great way how you can explain to kids and also to families how the brain works. And some of my smart colleagues from our center, they came up with this model and this theory of the 3 R's. And it is really important to convey to children right now a sense of reassurance. So Bill, answering some of your questions, really verbalizing to children, you are safe and I'll do my best to keep you safe. Showing to kids, whatever emotions you're experiencing and showing right now, I'm not going to walk away from you. I am here and I am containing them and I am able and ready to listen to you. Keeping a sense of routine in everything that we do. A lot of parents during the pandemic, they feel like they need to keep the same routine. But for kids with trauma, they are very often coming from environments that have been very chaotic and unpredictable. And only by keeping the same routines, bedtime, mealtime, empowering parents to maybe pick up 10 minutes each day at the same time and ask their child an activity that child wants to do with them. So fostering that type of relationship in a routine day. And then regulation, and we'll talk about regulation just in a minute. When we think about trauma, trauma could get into a cycle, and the trauma can affect the child, the caregiver, and also the professional that is working with those kids. So if we imagine some stressful incident, this will impact the way that the child will feel. Those feelings will impact the behaviors of those kids, right? Those behaviors will evoke feelings in the caregiver, right? And the caregiver will have their own reactions. And there are some specific type of kids that could be very triggering for caregivers. So definitely the child who is angry and oppositional, the child who constantly demands attention from you, the child who is approaching you but then rejecting you, like stay away from me, but then I need you and why you're not here, the child who is constantly in need of controlling, or witnessing child pain, especially for parents who have their own trauma. Witnessing the pain of their own children can be heavily triggering for them. And then we have common reactions of caregivers. And here are some of the things. So for example, we have the parent who feel ineffective. I feel like I'm a bad mother because I allowed this thing to happen to my child, right? And so I have a lot of feelings of guilt and shame. Parents who are angry at their children, who don't believe their children. Let's say we have caregivers who don't believe that the child was actually sexually abused or something happened to them. Another common reaction of parents is to withdraw, to avoid the child, right? So if I feel like my daughter doesn't really like me, if my thoughts are those, then I will shut down and I don't want to spend time with her. Or I had this mother whose daughter was raped, as I mentioned earlier, the same case, and she became overly controlling towards her daughter to the point that the daughter started to feel suffocated.
No.
So these are just some common reactions of caregivers and all of us that we have to keep in mind. And so we talk about this trauma cycle, just thinking about how the experiences, the thoughts, the emotions, the behaviors of the youth can impact the caregiver, the provider, and the whole system around the child. So how can we step out of this trauma cycle? First of all, putting your own oxygen mask and really breathing in, being aware of your own emotions, because that's not an easy work. And then how can we increase our ability to regulate? So for those of you working with parents, really validating their own emotions and provide them the education around trauma. Say something around, these are the ways that kids with trauma usually react. And it's nothing personal. It's not about you. So depersonalizing the behavior of the child from the parent. Helping parents, is it bedtime? Is it when my daughter throws temper tantrums? Increasing the capacity to tune into our own reactions, right? So mindfulness could be a great way to do that, but just fostering that sense of self-awareness. And now I would like to do this little surprise.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Could you go back to the slide before this one? One more.
This one?
Yes, please. I'm sorry. I just want to be able to make sure that I have it.
Of course.
I apologize. Okay, thank you.
No problem. No problem at all. So this is a little surprise quiz that I wanted to do with you, but I think I will leave this to our next session because I really would like to get more into the specific strategies about regulation and talk about regulation. So we will cover that later. And again, if you would like to connect with me personally, I'm completely available. So regulation strategies, what are some of the strategies that we can do and we can teach to parents and to kids to regulate emotions? And just as a refresher, regulation is our ability to safely and effectively manage our experience at different levels. And when we talk about self-regulation, there are really two main steps. Number one is identification. So if I don't know right now if I feel tired or anxious, it might be pretty difficult to regulate my emotion, right? So in any kind of intervention that we do with kids, we have to think about how can we help the child put names into their emotions and then teach them some skills to regulate those emotions. This is a theory about how trauma can affect our window of tolerance, which is essentially saying that for kids with trauma, that window of tolerance, which is basically the place where we feel more happy and peaceful and content, gets really shrinked. And when we think about regulation, we have to think about where is this kid right now? If we have the child that is anxious, angry, out of control in that red zone of hyperarousal, we need to think about some strategies that can down-regulate the child, right? Or if we have the kid who is in that hypoarousal stage of being spaced, zoned out, numb, depressed, we need some upregulation activities like movement, like physical exercise. Now, I would like to invite you to look at this scale going from -5 to +10, imagining that this is your emotional and physiological state right now. And just to think about where are you right now from this stage, going from -5, which is being tired, low energy, to +10, where you're almost hyper. Just for yourself, you don't need to share it, but kind of being mindful. Then I would like to ask you how comfortable that energy level that you're having right now feel in your body. Is it totally comfortable or very uncomfortable? And then I would like to ask you, how good a match is your energy right now for what you are doing? So right now you're sitting here, listening to me, learning. If you are too sleepy, maybe that's not a good match. So just thinking about how good of a match is your energy right now. And I would like to invite you right now, if your level of energy is too low or too high and not a good match for what you are doing right now, I would invite you to do something like stretching, getting a little bit of water or something that can bring your energy in that level of tolerance. And so this is just an example of something that you can do with kids using these sort of scales or thermometers to bring the awareness of where are you right now and what can we do to regulate you. This is a little tool that I personally created in one inpatient psychiatric setting. I'm sure you're probably familiar with the idea of the emotional thermometer. The idea here is to help kids recognize that emotions has different stages. And so if we help the child to identify, okay, if I am angry, and if I am in that green zone when my anger is starting to kick in, if I am aware of what are the behaviors that I usually do, what are the body sensations and thoughts that I'm having, right? Then I can do something about it. So this is just a handout that you can flip from the other side. And here, helping the child to identify what are some of the things that I can do when I'm in that green zone of my anger. And what are things that some other people can do? If I'm at home, what can my mom do to help me calm down my anger? And then we also ask kids, what are the things that other people shouldn't do? Very often, a lot of adults and kids who are coming from more problematic families, sometimes adults are doing things that are actually aggravating. And so giving the voice to the child to say, what are the things that others shouldn't do? It's important. So this is just a great tool, very easy to use. I can send you the PowerPoint and you can just print it out. Just the idea of helping the child identify what are my signs of my emotions and what can I do for them. In the next slides, I'll be sharing some tools from this website. This is the Medical University of South Carolina, who developed unbelievable resources that you can use online. I would recommend you to check out their website and you can download everything that I'll be showing you in a little bit. So this is a little game that we would have played if we had more time, but essentially these are cards. Each of those cards are containing different questions. So let's say, please give me some number. Shout the number, someone from you.
7.
7. Okay, so let's say if I click on 7, it takes me to a question. Name 3 ways that you can calm yourself down when you're feeling angry or upset. Can you name them?
So deep breathing, go for a walk, and ride my Harley.
Wow, so you have a Harley. Great. These are great ways. Perfect. Question 11, name 3 types of violence or abuse. Okay, so these are just some sort of questions that you can use online with kids for those of you who are working online and kind of investigating some sort of conversation. We won't go through all of these questions, but I just wanted to show you. And this is easily, you can create this very easily on PowerPoint. This is another game about emotions. So clicking again, each square has a different M&M. So the red one, you ask the child, tell me about the time that you felt angry, or tell me about the time that you felt surprised, or a time that you felt excited. Unfortunately, this is the only one resource that I can't share because it came out that M&Ms has their own rights, so we can't really share this, but it could be, again, very easily created. Or you can play around and play this game getting to know you. So you ask the child to pick a color and ask them, what is your favorite color? What is your favorite movie? What is your favorite food or toy or ice cream flavor and so forth? Relaxation techniques. We know that for kids with trauma, mindfulness in particular could be a very helpful resource. And I'm not going to talk too much about the science around it, but we do know that mindfulness is a really helpful technique to reduce PTSD symptoms and different outcomes. And so just some tips around really giving a lot of options, because kids with trauma may actually not feel comfortable to tune into their bodies and calm down. So I always, when I do these relaxation techniques, I'll always invite kids, you know, it's your choice if you want to keep your eyes open or closed. Doing a lot of sensory motor type of activities like stretching, using food, using colors, using movements, and making them really short. This is a website that you can check out about some very helpful activities around how can you explain, for example, mindfulness to kids. There are a lot of GIFs online. So this one is about synchronizing your breathing that you can use with children in your online work or face-to-face. This is a great mindfulness exercise. It's called the 3 minutes breathing space. It's like an hourglass showing, starting from step 1, being aware of your thoughts and emotions, then step 2, focusing on the breath, and step 3, getting larger about the body. Different visuals that you can use about just bringing awareness on sensations, emotions, thoughts. Inviting the child, do you feel actually angry or you're just hungry? Do you feel lonely or you're tired, right? This is 7 to 11. So inviting the child to take a breath in and count to 7 and then breathe out and count to 11. This could be a little long for beginners, so you can start with 4 or 5. A lot of applications on mindfulness that you can share with kids. Sesame Street has great videos about mindfulness and yoga and a lot of things that you can actually use. This is a book for little kids, how we can talk about mindfulness. I can share those slides with you. Christopher Willard is a psychologist that worked a lot with kids and mindfulness, but just like taking an alligator breath and opening and like inhaling like an alligator and then exhaling and the jar of the alligator is shutting, or breathe in and smelling your hot chocolate and breathe out, right? So just some visuals that, again, I can share with you. So again, just a reminder that before thinking of regulation, we have to think about where is this kid on that scale? Is it the kid withdrawn and frozen, or angry and aggressive, and then picking up the right regulation strategy. And then last but not least, thinking about yourself. And I would like to end on that note, recognizing the challenge that we are all sharing right now, the common trauma that we are all going through, and thinking about what can you do to bring in your days, in your life, the sense of nourishment and self-care. There might be a lot of warning signs that are showing exhaustion fatigue or compassion fatigue, as we call it, especially for people who are working with kids with trauma. This is just an assessment tool that I can send to people, which right now we don't have the time to look at. But really thinking about using your own oxygen mask, because if we don't take care of ourselves first, it will be very difficult to help those kids and those families.
Can you please go back to the other slide before that, please, and thank you, before that one. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Sorry that I'm rushing. I just want to be
No, you're fine.
And I will send all of these things to you.
Thank you.
No problem. And so just being mindful, what are some of the personal self-care strategies that you can take, which unfortunately right now a lot it's being shut down and closed, but how can you incorporate those moments during your day that you are checking on that scale and being aware of your own stress and regulation right now? Acknowledging what went well. Very often we focus on what went bad, but just taking moments during the day and thinking about what actually went well. These are just some self-care applications that you can use. And again, I'm happy to share those. And just thinking, how can we use this time to move from post-traumatic stress by COVID into post-traumatic growth? If you look back at yourself in a year from now, how do you want to remember yourself during this period of time? How do you want your children and family to remember you? And I think that even though we are going through a very stressful period of time, at the same time, this time could be a way to rethink our own values, to appreciate who we really are, what is important to us, and to connect to all of us as we are doing right now in a more profound and authentic way. So thank you very much. I am sorry that I went a little bit over time. I rushed a little bit the last slides, but as I said, I was very excited to really have this time with you. Thank you so much for being part of this training. And feel free to contact me, and I hope to see you soon again.
Thank you. You were awesome.
Thank you so much. And
thank you so much. Clearly, we need to have you back.
Oh, yes, I need to be back as well. I know.
Definitely, I love it, and you are so great. I love your accent. It's so great.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here, everyone. We'll share out the information and email it.
How do you have our emails? Do I just put it in the chat?
Yep, you can put it in the chat, and it saves it to the recording.
Yeah, and you'll email us too if there's another. I would love to come to another training.
Absolutely.
I would love to have all of you back. Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you so much. So we'll be in touch. I'll let you know when the recording's up, and we'll share it out. And then, of course, we will hope to see you again in December.
Absolutely.
Clearly, the need is huge for this type of training, and we really are so grateful at how much you know and how much time you've given us, and you're going to even give us more.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you.
And you all are so great. Thank you. I felt the energy. I felt the participation. There are not so many trainings that there is such a nice synergy, and that speaks a lot to all of you. So really,
people are so supportive of each other too, right? It always makes me feel so good to see that.
And that's also thank you, Amy. Thank you for organizing all this and all the work that you're putting behind the scenes.
Amy is the best. The best. The best.
Amy is the best. That's so true.
Happy holidays to you guys.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. I've been telling myself over and over and over, you got to get to those trauma training Tuesdays. They look so interesting. You got to get to it. And I keep on, other things to do, but I'm so glad.
Amy, can you write in your email in the chat, please? Is that okay?
Sure. And Missy, I can email you the thing that has links to all the past trainings.
Oh, thank you so much.
You can. There's a lot of good stuff.
I couldn't miss this one, and I'm so glad that I didn't.
Me too.
So glad to have you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Missy.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Amy, we will be in touch. You email me and we will talk.
That sounds great. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here.
And Zlata, is that how you? No, Zlatina? I don't know how you pronounce your name. I'm sorry.
Latina, that's great. Zlatina. Just think about Latina with a Z in front. So
Latina. It's very beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Bill.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.